Hi there, I'm Heidi Nord with the Brilliant Dyslexic, and this is our next sound juggling video, and this is Dr. Maria. Hello, Dr. Maria. In this video, should students worry about letters? No, don't worry about letters. It will all be good without them. In fact, woo! Okay, so don't worry about the letters, but it is good if you say the sounds, if you watch Dr. Maria, and if you listen to the sounds. Listen to the sounds, see the sounds, say the sounds. So this first one is oo, So in what happens if we take off the We're left with oo. The next one is ooze, ooze. In ooze, what happens if we take off the oo? We're left with zzz. In aim, what happens if we take off the a? You're left with In ook, what happens if we take off the k? You're left with ooh. In ought, what happens if we take off the ah? You're left with t. In what happens if we take off the You're left with I. In itch, what happens if you take off the I? You're left with ch. In I'd, what happens if you take off the I? You're left with d. In iv, what happens if you take off the v? You're left with I. In odd, what happens if you take off the d? You're left with ah. In if, what happens if you take off the I? You're left with in ode, what happens if you take off the d? You're left with o. In ool, what happens if you take off the oo? You're left with ul. In owl, what happens if you take off the ul? You're left with ow. In odd, what if you take off the d? You're left with ah. What do you say when you go to the doctor? Ah. Okay, in aj, what happens if you take off the ah? You're left with zh. In earth, what happens if you take off the th? You're left with In ache, what happens if you take off the a? You're left with k. In oof, what happens if you take off the f? You're left with ooh. And in ease, what happens if you take off the z? You're left with e. In ip, what happens if you take off the p? You're left with I. In ace, what happens if you take off the s? You're left with a. In eel, what happens if you take off the e? You're left with ul. In ege, what happens if you take off the j? You're left with e. And in eyes, what happens if you take off the I? You're left with z. And in oog, What if you take off the G? You are left with oo. Yay! We're done! Woohoo! Dance party, yay! Dr. Maria thanks you. I hope you have a great day. Have a great day! Yay!